let's go on and get started, shall we? All right, do you want to introduce me?
Yes, yes. We're so happy you're here today. My name is Sarah Brumfield. This is Ben Brumfield. Together we run from the page. Our speaker today is actually Ben, and he has been working with historical documents as a technologist for over 20 years. But today he's really speaking more as an amateur historian, which is a little bit scarier if you have this professional credentials as a technologist. But he's been working with a number of different collections in those 20 years, both, to kind of prove what we do it from the page and for personal curiosity and research purposes. So today he's talking about editing historical account books. He'll tell you which ones he's working on when we get started, which is now.
Okay, so let's start. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the editorial project I'm working on, and about the sources themselves, and then we'll talk about the actual process and how AI fits into them and how AI should not. So let's attempt. Okay, right. This is actually working. All right.
We got a new Zoom tool in play today, so we're not quite sure what we're doing. But
okay, so let's talk about account books, and specifically, why am I editing these particular account books? I was out for a walk with my neighbor 2 doors down the other night, telling him about this process. He is a retired accountant, and when I told him I was working with accounts from the 1830s, he suggested that I maybe had mental problems or, really, really enjoyed pain. So why am I editing these accounts? So let's talk about the source material and the author of the account books. Jeremiah White Graves was a store clerk and tobacco planter in Virginia. So most of his career is antebellum. It spans the Civil War, Reconstruction, and part of the early Emancipation period. He owned a property. He owned several properties, but he owned one called Aspen Grove, which was a tobacco plantation in the northern part of Pennsylvania County, Virginia. Some of his papers have come down to us and were donated to the University of Virginia, where they are in the Shannon Library Special Collections with manuscript call number 5047, which I was able to see 2 weeks ago for the first time in person, which is very exciting. So the reason that I'm interested in these account books is they highlight, as I mentioned, this one property, Aspen Grove. So Aspen Grove was owned by Jeremiah White Graves from 1820 until around 1878, a little bit later. He has a stroke around 1876, 1878, and so ownership and control passes to his son Jacob. In 1882, Jacob swaps farm with my great-great-grandparents, and so the Aspen Grove has been the Brumfield home place from then down to the present. While there have been some changes in ownership, it is still owned by my family. So in 2011, there was timber operations done on the farm, and we were all very fortunate that the logger was a very well-trained African-American logger who recognized a slave cemetery in the otherwise undifferentiated grown-up woods. There are no markers at the slave cemetery. He was able to recognize depressions, I think a little bit of periwinkle on the ground, and the remains of an old iron gate. So there's this cemetery that's an important part of the property, and it would be really nice to be able to memorialize the people who are buried there. In order to do that, though, we need to know who they are. So to figure out more information about this, we started looking at the diaries and informal accounts. So this is about 1,300 pages of diaries. The well-structured parts of them look like this. You can see a good example. These are the things that really mention give the greatest information of life of the enslaved people who are working for graves and their families living on this property. And you see an example here. Johnson's very sick. Dr. Thompson has been to see me once for bleeding at the nose, and Johnson once. Very sickly times, lots of people dying of typhoid fever, etc., etc. All right, so here we have this information about Johnson, who's one of the male adult enslaved workers working for graves, and about some medical treatment. So that's interesting to know. So moving on, right, we also have informal accounts interleaved with the diaries. And these are ones that mention people by name, right? We see here accounts with my Frederick, for example. That is Frederick, and later on we see information about his death. We learn who his widow is. There's a lot of information that comes from these accounts, but they're a big mess, right? Jeremiah White Graves wants to save on paper, and he uses every part of a page for running accounts, and then he'll copy things to other places. You can see the kinds of things we see in these informal accounts. They're very heterogeneous. We've got shipments of corn, we've got shipments of meat, we've got all this kind of stuff. And perhaps worst of all, it's really hard to tell where he's writing from about these things. If he has multiple properties and he mentions people, where are they? What property are they? So the diaries do mention death. They do mention burial. So they are good sources of information for this property history memorialization project. But as we can see in this account, we don't actually necessarily know where people are. We see, for example, this instance of Melissa, who I now know is Frederick's wife. Melissa has a child, and Graves mentioned that she's had 10 children, but she lost 2, and he lists their names, right? Nicey and Morris. We also see, though, just because the diaries mention death, we don't know that people are buried there. There's another example of someone named Roby and their child dying, and Graves sends Jordan to dig a grave someplace else for Roby, right? So we know people are buried, but we know they're not all buried at Aspen Grove, right? And we want to get this right. So what we fundamentally need is a history of Graves's property ownership that lets us contextualize the diary entries and the mentions of death and burial. And to that, we have to turn to the formal accounts. So in addition to the 1,300 odd pages of informal accounts and diaries, there are about another 600 pages of formal accounts. And they look like this, right? This is what Graves would describe as folio 27. By folio, he means an opening. And on the left-hand side, you see this DR, and I'm going to actually try to use the zoom tool to spotlight this. So we see left-hand DR, meaning that these are the accounts of Daniel and William King with Graves, and DR is where Daniel and William King is a debtor. So Graves is giving them something. And then on the right-hand side, we see the credit entries. So these are the ways that Daniel and William King are paying Graves back, right? So Daniel and William King are primarily paying Graves in labor, and they are primarily receiving rents and supplies from him. So, right, really what they have to offer are his labor. So if I can stop spotlighting and advance slides.
Maybe this one?
There we go. Okay, but the great thing about these formal accounts is that they do give a property history, right? This is Daniel King renting a plantation from 1825, 1826, 1827, 1828. He's renting this those 4 years. There's a record of them, And we also have a record of who rented this particular piece of property before, S. Dove, whoever that is, right? So here is information about who resided on one of Graves's properties. It's not the only one, right? If we take a look at folio 6, we see Alexander Garrett rents the plantation on Camp Branch, which in the survey records that we've seen are the description of Aspen Grove. So this is where the slave cemetery is. So if we're able to transcribe and edit the formal records, formal accounts that mention property, that mention rent and plantation, then we finally got something that we can work with here. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Before we get into the process, let's talk about tools. So back in 2015 and 2016, Anna Ogby Davies, who's an anthropologist at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I were working on encoding the Stagville accounts. And somebody, Julie and I mentioned that she lives about 6 miles from Stagville Plantation. I hope you visit. It's absolutely amazing. They do a better job of representing the lives of enslaved people than really any site that we've seen. Yeah, it's really fantastic. So we developed a system for encoding these accounts using markdown tables. You see on the right the encoding of the accounts on the left. And what we're fundamentally doing is almost creating ASCII art to lay out these tables.
It's called Markdown.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a standard.
There is a standard.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's easy. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so why do this in Markdown? The reason we do this in Markdown is that we get 2 different kinds of outputs from that. One is a very readable HTML output that gives us, an encoding, fundamentally a transcription of the document. That's really great. But the other thing that we get is the ability to extract those entries in a structured way as a spreadsheet from these markdown tables, and then be able to use that to do quantitative analysis. So this is a visualization of the Stagville slave ledgers. The Cameron family in the the earliest decades of the 1800s had a plantation store, and they kept 2 sets of books. One's for transactions with free customers, one for transactions with enslaved customers. And it's interesting to see things like, okay, what are enslaved customers paying with? Well, here's a visualization of the entries of what people are paying with. And you can do other kinds of analysis. You can see, what kind of items are bought at the same time as others. And, when they're buying powder, they're often buying shot, for example, things like that. The problem with this kind of encoding, even though it's really flexible, is it's hard. So the diaries and informal accounts, well, at least the diaries were transcribed in 2018 and 2019.
And he's back to the Graves diaries.
Yeah, the Graves diaries. Sorry, yes, that's
not
right.
The Stagville.
By Fran Salmon, who is a descendant of Jeremiah White Graves. And she did a great job transcribing the diary entries, doing indexing of the people who are mentioned. She did a lot of additional research because she knows the Graves genealogy and was able to figure out family relations, which I would not have been able to tease out when you've got Jeremiah White Graves who has Jeremiah Hunt Graves, and it seems like all the women are named Nancy. It's a big mess, but she was able to figure all this stuff out. But she was not willing to go through and do this. And frankly, I tried my hand at it, and I couldn't either, right? I mean, it was so slow. It was taking multiple hours per page. So let's fast forward to November, when Sarah and I added Gemini support to From the Page that does AI drafts. This has primarily been used for material that is more textual, like letters and diaries. But one of the early volunteers, named Elaine Hinch, worked with a local institution, I want to say it's the Whitby Museum, the Whitby Museum Archive in Yorkshire, to transcribe some even uglier account books. And she was able to use the markdown that was created by Gemini and paste that in. And you can see her comments on this saying, it's so much quicker, it's so much more satisfied. I have to come in and replace the words, but she doesn't have to focus on the formatting. Okay, this is exciting, right? This means that if we can get a machine to do all the twiddly ASCII art, we can focus on the people and the items and the numbers. And that kind of unlocks these account books for me. So let's move into the next section of this talk, which is what my process is for editing the Jeremiah White Graves formal accounts. So we're going to go through 3 levels of editing, from low level up to very high level. So I'm working with the credit side of one set of accounts, Folio 27, Daniel and William King's accounts with Jeremiah White Graves. And the first thing I do is I don't try to transcribe anything, I just look at the page. I can tell in this case, Graves has filled up the entire page with these accounts, so it's really just it's one person, right? He hasn't gone in and squeezed other people in the empty space on the screen. That's really handy. I can also tell there's a single year of entries. We're only talking about 1836. Most of the entries are only 1 or 2 lines. He doesn't have a wild digression in here talking about something else or a contract or an IRU. And on the credit side of this account, there's no cross-writing. There is on the debit side, and we'll get to that later. So the first thing I do, acquaint myself with the layout of the page. The second thing I do then is go to transcribe it, and I bring in the Gemini created AI draft. The AI draft itself is pretty good, but it's got a lot of stuff that I don't need. Particularly if you look down at the bottom, it's pulled in and transcribed the watermarks that UVA Library put on all of our images. Well, we don't need the call number. That's not actually part of our edition. It also has headers that are kind of non-standard. I'm going to want to replace those, so I change those. Okay, the next thing I do is take a look at the columnar layout. A lot of the time, Gemini will do things like look at a snippet of text that is on the other side of the spine that was perhaps accidentally digitized and not cropped out, and think that that's an additional column. And add that, transcribe those little snippets and fragments of words as if they're another column in the table. That doesn't happen here. That's great. I've seen other problems. In this case, it looks like Gemini did not differentiate between the dollars and cents amounts on the right-hand side. So I'm going to have to fix that myself. So.
Now, the thing to realize about all these AI drafts, this is what this page looks like. The next page, it might do it might differentiate between dollars and cents. And
yes.
this is so hard to wrap your head around because we are used to software being consistent, and it isn't. And that's frustrating, right? People are like, well, can't we fix this? And I'm like, well, we can run it again, but
yes, you're kind of rolling the dice every time. Mm-hmm. What is it going to come up with? Okay, so again, I am essentially trying to consolidate the format before I look at the contents. So I fix the columns, I look for multi-line entries, I combined all the multi-line entries. So now I should have one entry in the transcription.
So I'm gonna go back. So look, he's got arrows where Gemini is giving him 2 lines.
2 entries, because there's 2 lines.
Yeah,
right?
And he is taking those like branch and found, and he's adding it to the same line, even though he's got the page break within that cell.
The line break, yes, yeah. I'm adding line breaks. I do not want to detail that. It's a little. I have been told by my mother-in-law this morning that this presentation was a bit dry, so we're not going into the line breaks. Okay, so that was all purely technical about layout. We haven't corrected a name, we haven't corrected a typo or anything. So let's move up a level to what I think of as mid-level editing tasks. So one of the things that I want to do is go in and correct all of the dates and all the amounts. I find that this is pretty boring, and I do this best. You might be able to click on it and get
color. Like, where do you want? Where is the January? We don't really have that here. Yeah. Oops. No, that went forward. That didn't work.
All right. Let's try this and red. And okay. Yeah. So right? I look at an entry like this and I say, right, he originally wrote 23rd and then he replaced it with 24th. So I go in and I modify that by adding deletion and insertion tags, right? This is a level of markup that may not seem to suit the goals of figuring out what properties Graves owned, right? The goal of the edition is a property history. Does it matter that he crossed out third and wrote four? No, but it has the byproduct of making me look really, really hard at the draft, right? Because I'm trying to look at these things, or look at, up here we've got a superscript for January, right? Those things force me to focus, and they force me to be complete and not trust the computer. Okay, let's see if we can go to the next page. No. Okay, all right.
Go back. I think to that arrow, maybe.
There we go. Okay, having done that, I can actually focus on the entries, right? So if we take a look at one of these entries here, we've actually got two entries. One is by amount brought from folio 23. He originally wrote $12 and changed it to $11.99. All right, so again, we want to focus as carefully as we can on every letter. So that's one of the reasons why I'm adding a lot of superscripts. So if we look down here, we can see the changes I made from the Gemini draft. And we see one of the things I did is I said, okay, AMT, that T is a superscript. The brought from, his T's for broughts, in this case, always lead directly into the F, and Gemini misses that T, right? So the superscript T is there, Gemini missed it altogether, and it always does. The next entry, by Williams, helping about chimney one day. Gemini missed the S in the superscript William, so let's add that as well, right? These may not be that meaningful, but they help me do a very close reading and correction of the entries. So let me attempt to go to the next screen. And I keep doing this, entry by entry by entry, right? Here are 4 entries in which, I'm doing markup saying, well, I'm not entirely sure what this piece right here is. That could be until, or it could be tree. Tree doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to use unclear tags to mark that up. We've got a superscript here. Gemini interpreted these random dots on the page as being colons. We want to delete that. A much more significant change is Gemini thought that the word work here was actually Mr. R-A-N or something. It's not Mr. Ron, it's the word work. We go through this until we're done with everything, every entry on the page. This process takes about an hour for a full page account like this. Okay, but now we can move up to the high level. High level involves a little bit more interpretation, and there are places where we are applying our own knowledge, and there are places where we're going to be going back and forth with other AI tools. So the first thing I want to do is mark up the people. So in this case, let me try to highlight again. We mentioned by, he's getting paid by Self, Smith, and somebody, maybe Jonas. So by Self, Smith, and a name I can't read, getting peaches. 1 load Friday and a half the day Saturday. Okay, so I'm going to use our from the page wiki link to mark up those subject and say Smith King is a person here, right? A person being identified. Having done that, we can go and read every page that mentions Smith King that's been indexed to Smith. So we've got that information, and that is particularly valuable when we're looking, and particularly for names of people who are enslaved, because this lets us see them across the diary entries, across the informal accounts, and across the accounts once all of this is indexed. So the second thing that I do after marking up all the people is I go and I just check the entire corrected transcript against the original Gemini. In this case, you can see all the changes that I made. There are not that many. Gemini got things pretty right. There's some kind of false positive of the ampersand is marked as incorrect, but the rest of it, we're seeing, instead of Mr. Ron, we're seeing work, and those are kind of the big deals. The next thing I do is read Gemini's AI reasoning steps. One of the things...
Which is on both the previous
Yes.
slide and this slide are both on the AI tab and from the page. So
Yes.
there are tools that are available anytime you choose to use AI with from the page.
One of the things I'm looking for here is anything that Gemini focused on really hard, anything it really struggled with. There's not too much here. The closest thing that I found is when it discusses whether PR is PT. I agree. Sometimes it looks like PT, sometimes it looks like PR. I think PR makes a lot more sense in this case, but
What did it mean?
Per.
Oh.
Yeah, on behalf
Not
of.
pint or
Yes,
pence or
yes,
I don't know,
right.
whatever else P could stand for, right?
Okay, so now we can do something a lot more interesting and a lot more high level, right? We've got the credit side of these transactions, right? We've got the credit side of Daniel King and this 1836 account. We've also got the debit side of the account, right? So these should balance out. I'm not that great at balancing math or understanding historic accounts, right? Remember, I am
He has a computer science degree, but
right,
we don't
but
like to do
but I don't like to
arithmetic.
do this, right?
Yeah.
And we have the additional problem of Graves is he's recording all of his prices in Virginia money of pounds, shillings, and pence, and he's recording all of his totals in dollars and cents, and he's converting between the two, right? It's a big old mess. So what I do is I take the debit side and the credit side and of the accounts with Daniel King, and I paste it into a single ChatGPT session, and we're using ChatGPT Pro, so this is all paid for, in which I have done previous account work, this kind of thing. And I say, here's my transcriptions of both sides of these accounts. Please look for anomalies. Look for any transcription errors, right? This is something I'm not going to do. But ChatGPT does some work and comes up with things that I can look for, right? It says the arithmetic exposes transcription errors, and there's also some things that the previous accounts, folio 23, not this folio 27, were problems with, that we asked questions about before. So it lists these and then goes into detail. So the answers are not necessarily the most important things here because it does tend to riff for a while. But the questions are really interesting. When it says, hey, you transcribed this quart of vinegar as being 62 cents. Well, was it really 62 cents? This doesn't really work with the math. And I look more carefully at the image and I can see that that's not really a 2, right? That is probably actually a 4, right? There's also a chance that it's 6 1/4. I'm not sure, but the point is, this is worth revisiting. This is worth looking at again, because the AI has pointed out there's a potential problem here. And when I look at it, it is not the 62 that I originally transcribed it as.
We're not sure.
We're not sure what the answer is.
That's what ChatGPT
Right,
thinks
right.
it is either. I mean,
Right. Now you have to be very careful with these because you can really go down a rabbit hole. This entry, it pointed out, it's like, and very cheerfully it says, oh, this is my favorite find in the new account. Well, leaving aside the use of find here, which I disapprove of. Also, I'm glad the AI has favorite account entries. Fantastic. That said, this is a real challenge, right? Is this actually $4, right? Clearly, it's added later, $4. He's to hill 4 days for this corn. And based on other things I know, people are paid less than, usually they're paid 50 cents a day for hilling. So this doesn't make sense. But ChatGPT also says this doesn't make sense. And the problem with going back and forth with that is you say, all right, well, you say this, but are you sure? I'm trying to get advanced, right. Okay, well, what could be going on? And it goes and it thinks and says, oh, well, maybe it is shillings, I don't know. And I go back and forth. And eventually I realize, what am I even doing here? Right? We know about the property. Do I care how much people are being paid for a day hilling? It doesn't really serve my research need. And it's really tempting to go down these rabbit holes with these AIs because they're very engaging. Let's move on to the next potential error.
And I'm going to point out, there's a lot of questions coming in the chat, and we will handle those when Ben gets through the whole thing. We'll have plenty of time, and we'll start with those questions.
Yes, yeah. Okay, this is one of the benefits of doing all of the Daniel King accounts on multiple folios in the same chat context, because it's looking and saying, okay, the first line of folio 27 says it's carrying 1199 over from folio 23. The last line of folio 23, you transcribe not as 1199, but as $11. Are you sure that's right? All right, so let's take a look at folio 23, and you know, that could be a 9. I still see this example of him writing 12 and then changing it to 11. And the fact that the 99 is very clear on folio 27 makes me go back to a previous page and update that based on this double checking process. So the AI is very good in this case at checking my work. It's not perfect at all, and a lot of times its explanations and its solutions are wrong, but when it says there's a problem, there often is a problem. Right, and one of these is this example on the debit side of the account. I transcribed the cross-writing for Daniel and William King's 1836 as saying D.W. and Thomas King agreement, etc., this 28th of July, 1834, delivered. Right, you can see down at the bottom, this is the cross-writing rotated so we can see it a little bit better. ChatGPT came back and said, are you sure that's 1834? Everything else says 1836. Is that really right? Well, you know, when I look at the cross-writing, that those two parallel lines are oftentimes how Graves writes a 6. So
Well,
that's a
everything,
fair catch.
I mean, I'm sorry, you can't settle an account 2 years before, right? Like, it doesn't make sense logically,
Yeah,
right?
but the fun thing about this is it is able to check my transcription errors without seeing the image, right? It's just looking for internal consistency. That's pretty exciting. So let's talk a little bit more about AI and its possibilities and its temptations. One big temptation, once deep research came out in September, I said, all right, why not try to have deep research just do this work for me, right? So I told it, read the diary and account books at this site, spend time analyzing the entries to come up with a property history. Now, the results look really, really impressive. It goes through and it lists the properties that Graves owns. It lists the properties Graves manages. It gives us a timeline. And at the end, it gives us notes and ambiguities. Furthermore, all of those links that you see with the little fromthepage.com icon, those are links back to the pages that mention these things, or that it claims mentions these things. Wow, well, that's cool. Maybe we can come up with a prosopography. Maybe we can actually get a list of people who are mentioned and the enslaved people who show up. Wow, it can just do all our work for us. Okay, no, it can't, right? We know for a fact that the sources it read are incomplete because we're busy transcribing those sources. So it's confidently providing us results of the things that it can see without telling us what it can't see. We don't even know that it read every page of the diaries that it had access to. We really don't have any idea. And this project is too important to leave to some AI output. So how can we fight these kinds of temptations, these really powerful tools? one of the things that I want to do and suggest to people is, instead of asking for an AI to give you an answer to a task, please translate this letter from French to English. Ask it to give multiple versions. Ask it to give multiple hypotheses. One of the things that that does is lets it not fudge, right? It gives it an out if it doesn't know something. But the more important thing it does is it forces us to treat the AI output as tentative, as hypothetical, as things to be researched rather than as answers to our questions. The other thing I want to try to do is not ask questions if I can't verify the answer, right? I'm a professional technologist. I'm an amateur editor. I am not a historian. I don't want to ask it questions about the relationships between people there, right? That is something that what do I do with those answers, right? That they'll seem very compelling, just like the prosopography seemed compelling, but what do I do with that? I don't know. So don't ask. Don't ask. What are some of the things that it's really good at, right? Inside my context of working with the Daniel King accounts, I said, I really want to learn more about these based on the questions I've asked and the things I've pasted in. What are resources that I could use for doing further research? And I did that using not the deep research feature, but the web search feature. And after a minute and a half, I got a really nice reading list. And I know that it's really nice because items 4 and 8, those recommendations I own and I like, right? I've read these. This is a solid reading list. But the example of the first one, James Robinson, How to Do Single Entry Bookkeeping from the 1830s.
Which Graves probably read.
Graves probably might have been trained on when he was a clerk, right? I have started reading that, and it's really helpful. It lays out the kinds of instructions that somebody like Graves would have been doing. The second example, talking about account keeping in rural Virginia, is extremely topical, right? This is really handy, and I kind of love this. So I want to close with a possibility. One of the things I thought that was interesting was asking about 2 entries. They're these strange set of entries in which Daniel King and his family members are doing some kind of activity in the woods, and then they're building a logging house, tobacco house, and he mentions this is delivered, and then later on they say there's 400 slabs that are not delivered. They're yet in the woods at 2 shillings per hundred, and here's how much I'm going to pay you for them. What does that mean, right? I don't want to assume that a tobacco house is a curing barn. I don't want to assume that it's a log barn like we see in Southside Virginia, because those are all flue-cured barns that don't really arise until after the 1870s. This is an account from 1833. I don't even know if they have log barns. And the cool thing about the response here that I think shows some potential of AI is that the source that it lists asserting that log barns existed in antebellum Virginia were sources I don't think that I would ever have been able to find, right? It does have some good secondary literature, but one of the things it points to is applications for properties to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Applications that mention log barns with dates in Virginia. The first one in Halifax County.
Just the next county over.
Is the next county over from Graves. We're probably talking about 40 miles from Graves's farm, and they have log barns from 1840 that are in ruins. Below that, we see an example from the 1830 of a V-notch log barn in Maryland. This is the kind of research that I'm not sure any of us had access to before. This is very impressive. So that is kind of the hopeful note that I want to end on. And then before we turn things over to questions, do you want to mention these webinars?
Yeah, so we've got 2 more webinars coming up, and we'll drop the link into the chat here in a minute. On September 3rd, we have a graduate student also from that same area of Virginia who is talking about history beyond the institution, digital preservation, crowdsourcing, and the future of AI in the Manumission project. So he's using a lot of different AI tools and documents and finding documents in the archive that indicate when people were manumitted, right? That's the right word. So it's really interesting. He spoke at a conference Ben was at 2 weeks ago, and also uses from the page. So, and then we often offer your first crowdsourcing project as kind of an introduction to From the Page and kind of public participation in crowdsourcing. So we're offering that on September the 24th, if you'd like to join us for that. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go take a look at the chat window.
Why don't you let me read the questions
Okay,
and you can do the
great.
answers. Okay. There's a subset of us who love account books, and I'm with you, Megan. I don't actually do the transcription of them, but I actually I always feel like organizations and people show their values by where they spend their money, and so it's always, I think, real when you look at account books. Chuck Sherrill, we're hoping you will tell us how to make account book transcription really easy. Okay, I don't know whether this is really easy, but it definitely is
It's
easier.
Yeah, getting those down to 1 hour per page, I'm really excited about.
Yeah. Any references to, oh, yes, that's a Laura conversation, but yes. Okay, let's see. Julie Nye is transcribing for Sandy Spring Museum using Gemini AI Draft. That's within from the page. Maybe not getting marked down. We should talk about that on the side.
Yeah, that is something that that may change in a few.
Well, it also might be that we did some of
months.
some of their work earlier. Like, I don't know, it depends how you write your prompt, and it changes all the time. So I think most of the things I've seen recently is getting marked down, but maybe that was older. Okay, what do we see? Line breaks. Okay, as you correct Gemini's transcriptions, does it train Gemini to correctly transcribe other entries?
Yeah, and the answer is, good question, Debbie. The answer is no. At least only indirectly, right? This is not a tool like Transcribus in which you're creating your own models, right? We are using this absolutely massive model. In this case, I think it was Gemini 3.1 Pro. And the best training that we can do is prompt tuning.
And you can do something called fine tuning where you start adding in a bunch of examples to your prompt. We don't do that for any of our material for 2 reasons. One, we're aiming for a general purpose prompt that anyone on From the Page can use. If you want a custom prompt, we can go and work with you on that, but that's kind of a separate approach. But I find that the more stuff we throw into that prompt, the worse the results we get.
I mean,
and that's kind of scary.
For one example, early on we said, well, why don't we try to ask it to do TEI tagging? And it did a decent job of adding the XML characters, the XML entities around our text. But the results were almost unusable, right? You're staring at this forest of angle brackets. And so there's kind of this balance of how much do you want the AI to do, but you still need to produce something that is usable, that an editor can actually work with. Knowing, like, it would be different if no human would ever review this and we were publishing things online with all these warning messages and things like that. In that case, sure. Leaving aside whether you should ever do that in the first place. But because I'm going to be reading this and I'm going to be learning things as I go, it's a balance. It's a balance.
Cynthia Hyder adds a comment transcribing the Daniel Smith and somebody were doing peaches. She says JAS, James.
James. Oh, awesome. Fantastic. All right.
Ashley Gerard is indexing enslaved individuals and church records at Wake Forest. Very cool.
Yeah.
Cynthia comes back in working on transcriptions of Ben Franklin's account books. I bet his are beautiful because he was so
I don't know about his handwriting. I don't know.
Ran into a calculation issue because of the pound shillings pence conversion rate was different before 19 That's gonna be a typo.
No,
18.
1971 would have been decimalization of British currency.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to incorporate that kind of knowledge into your prompt, or does that kind of analysis happen in another process later?
Well, here's the thing that really surprises me. Both ChatGPT and Gemini seem enough context aware that they both make references to this being Virginia money, which has its own conversion rate, right? So Virginia money is priced at 6 shillings, 6 Virginia money shillings per silver dollar, not 20 shillings per pound, or it's not the pound shilling pence we're used to, and they very rarely use pounds we've seen so far. So I'm actually surprised by how good the LLMs are at doing local colonial or post-colonial currencies.
And the conversions. They will do the conversions,
Yeah.
like some of the very early tests that.
Yeah, we did work with Gemini with some informal accounts where Graves is talking about, someone has agreed to work for him at $14 shillings a month. And he comes and he works this number of days, he works this number of days, he works this number of days, and all right, that means that he's owed, I don't know, $3 or something. And we see the Gemini reasoning output actually step through what a likely daily rate would have been in Virginia money, tally the number of days, do that conversion, and then match that against the total.
That they were paid in dollars.
In dollars, right? And so, again, some of this may be hallucinations, but it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I think you need to give it the context of what year it is. So either that needs to show up in the document because it's part of the transcription, or you need to tell it the year in order maybe for it to get some of that right. But Megan Brett says, I've always been interested in checking the math of account books. I expect there would be human errors in the math. Probably, yes, probably. But I'm also curious about the possibility of someone fudging numbers to their benefit.
Yeah. There is a great example of this in the Graves diaries, in which William has, he credits William for having undercharged him, or underpaid him in his entries, and that in fact he will pay him 50 cents a day, even though originally the agreement was 2 shillings 6 pence a day, and this guy is complaining, and he's just going to give him the money to make him go away, right?
But he's bullshitting him, right?
I think William he might. Well, I don't know, right? Graves is writing to his, Graves doesn't want to pay him the extra whatever it is, but yeah, I don't know who's right. Mm-hmm. But Graves is obviously being very pissy when he's writing this down in his account books.
Let's see. Asking AI for multiple versions, nice strategy. In other words, treat AI as a hostile witness. I like that as a phrasing. That's really good. Yeah. The book recommendations. Do all of those books actually exist?
I could go fetch 2 of them off my shelves. The other ones are ones that I am mostly familiar with, that I have encountered in the past. The one that was the historic account book that it provided a link to me on the Internet Archive, I've pulled up. Those seem to be solid.
Let's see. Liz Fisher says, curious about token use and what the cost per page works out to roughly for going through all levels of this process. Okay, so basically Ben did 2 different AI interactions. One of them was a transcript of a page, using from the page. We figured those pages, we originally figured that they cost about 2 cents a page, but recently we have done more math and discovered they cost about 6 cents a page.
That was unwelcome.
Yeah, that was unwelcome. And that's because we're using Gemini 3.1 Pro. I actually just deployed yesterday, and I'm running on our HTR sandbox Gemini 3.6 and 3.7 Flash, which other people have done some experiments with, and might be as good for transcription. So we're going to have to dig into that and decide if we're comfortable with it. Ben's also going to drop in the tokens.
Yeah, this was, so Liz, I dropped in the token counts from the Gemini transcription.
Yeah, the thing this misses, and things we missed when we were doing these calculations on how much it was going to cost us to do all of this, is there's tool tokens that aren't captured there, and it's gotten confusing because of that. So
Yeah, because apparently they use some
once you drop
computer vision.
once you drop an image in, there's tool tokens that become part of the thing.
Okay. Next question from Liz.
You showed some cross-writing. Do you have to deal with much struck through, canceled text? I have documents with whole pages or individual lines crossed out and had a chance to see how AI transcription does with it.
Yeah, financial records are hard in that sometimes there is a cross-out that is a literal deletion because the person wrote the wrong thing. Sometimes we see entries that are crossed out as payment of a debt, right? You'll have an IOU, and then you'll have a great big X through it. And you can imagine Graves doing that in front of the other party to this, whatever transaction or whatever debt this is. Sometimes we see cross-writing with like marks on them, like that example of DW and whoever the other person was, King. That cross-writing example he showed, that was actually cancellation of a debt, right? He's writing, this is done. I only encode true deletions, right? Places where there's a perfectly legible account that has a single line through it because it's all paid off. I don't care.
Well, and the AI transcribes it for you in that case.
It depends. It depends. Yeah.
Some questions about digitizing minute books. We like scanning them, and because you want to put the images online with your transcription. So I would say you definitely want an image, but we have also built frames for iPhones and use that to digitize family letters.
Yeah.
And it's good enough.
The
archivist might not want me to say that.
There are actual portable folding archival bipod mounts that you can use that would just slide underneath a book that's open in front of you and will hold your camera facing down. And like they are smaller than an umbrella, and they're really cool.
Do you ever expand abbreviations?
I do not expand abbreviations in this case. Sometimes that gets me into trouble. I had a lot of trouble with SETY or SCTY, which does not mean secretary, but means surety. So co-signer on a loan or bond or something.
Okay, less about the AI function. When you annotate with a person's name and have them indexed, can you add metadata to that person, like birth year or notes, or just see when they appear in the documents? You can add metadata. There's a text block where you can type whatever you want. There's some citation fields. You can turn on in the settings, birth date, death date.
Race description, gender or sex. I don't remember how it's labeled. And they vary based on, so for places you can have latitude, longitude. For organizations, there are kind of creation date, end dates.
Yeah. Very much our documentary editing community uses a lot of that. So, I've also used AI to calculate the market value of cotton based on amounts harvested in account books for 1800s Mississippi plantations with varying success. I would love to hear more about that, JML. I don't know who you are, but
JML,
very cool.
You might be presenting one of our next webinars. That's right.
That's the sort of thing we all like to know.
Send email to support@fromthepage.com. We'd love to chat more.
Yeah. Debbie says, your project is so interesting, Ben, and it's thrilled to see all of this documents coming together, not only to give enslaved people their names and records of their lives back, but also to recreate the early economic transactions and specific people. Very nice, thanks, Debbie. Okay, Ben dropped in the webinars link. Poppy says, can you explain the strengths of different platforms' tools? From the Page is obviously the best one out there, and you should not use anything else.
But we use
AI tools here,
AI tools.
Yes.
We do not currently trust anything except for Gemini Pro to do manuscript transcription.
We are doing a little bit of stuff with Claude. We'll have a talk on that in late September, but it's not.
It's not great, and we are feeding it blueprints that have writing in draftsman's hand. And it's still not great.
And it's still not as good as Gemini. So
yeah.
If you're going to do transcription, use Gemini 3.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, we're very pro Gemini for transcription, but you notice all the analysis Ben did, he used ChatGPT. I'm at the point where if I happen to be doing that, I would probably be using Claude just because I've been using it for coding stuff and it's an analysis of documents and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, right now we, like the the rule of thumb that I at least use right now is I use Claude for writing code, I use Gemini for dealing with for reading images, and I use ChatGPT for working with words and text, and especially for any kind of web search, right? It is really good at these kinds of go find me documents about this, right? I'm pleased with that. I have not tested Claude or Gemini for those things. They might be fun.
Yeah, Poppy also says it can be concerning to dump a large amount of historical work into an AI model without certainty about where it may go, if it will be used or interpreted in incorrect ways. Okay, so for transcription, I can talk to this, and I can talk to it in two ways. One is, like, when you're using from the page, we are actually paying for their API use, and it says your material not used to train our products. So it doesn't turn around and pull it in.
Right, and we actually trust Google when they say that, because remember, they are selling to
corporations.
They're selling to corporations, and if Morgan Stanley data starts showing up in Charles Schwab's chat sessions, there are going to be some massive lawsuits.
Right. Okay, but you're going to pull in those transcriptions. You're going to put them on from the page on something that is publicly transcribable, and an AI tab that has the transcription, or a user will come, you will transcribe
it. Or you're
it,
going to publish them somewhere.
or you're going to put them on your digital asset management system, and all the LLMs are going to pull them in anyway. And the thing is, like that National Park Service stuff, I actually really want to know where that is online, and when it was imaged, and when obviously they know about it, and we wanted them to know about it because it was something cool to find out,
quite
right?
a bit. Yeah, knowing the stuff about log barns.
Yeah, 10 years ago, the IIIF community was like, how can we get Google to index more of our stuff? And this is the same conversation. You're going to want stuff in LLMs, even though it's hard. So, yeah.
Gemini 3 for transcription, is it only for English? We have seen good results in other languages, but
good is in quotes.
Yeah, and by good I mean not hallucinating and not making things up, but the quality of the transcription degrades
over time. Like further back, these are
Yes.
colonial Spanish is one of the projects we're thinking of, right?
Yeah, and the colonial Spanish materials we've seen, the only thing that's one of the only times we've seen something that comes close to hallucination, in that we see these baptismal registers that are very, very formulaic, and we've seen examples of it expanding abbreviations to the full thing that would actually abbreviate in the original, which the project has no problem with, but I don't really like. I kind of mistrust. We are at time. Yeah.
So we're happy to answer any more questions that you all have.
We
but
can hang out for a while. Thank you all for coming. I cannot believe we got 60-some people here talking about account books.
But we think this is what AI is enabling, right? Like account books are hard, and these tools are making them so much easier.
And one of the things that I'm learning is I want to be able to search the AI transcriptions of the informal accounts, because I would really love to find all the formal accounts that mention rent or plantation, so that I can focus on the account holders who are renting property from graves.
Okay, Kathy Smith says, are you saying we can use your service for our organizational documents? We get accused of not selling hard enough. Yes, please come use from the page, schedule a call with us. We'll do a follow-up email with a link to this recording, and we'll make sure there's a link to scheduling a call with us. We'll talk to anybody about projects. Like, if you're like, yeah, maybe, sure, come talk to us. We'll tell you what we do with your documents, and then you can go off to something else. That's fine. So,
Laura would like a list version of the workflow. I can type that up. I've got it in an outline, and we could send that out with a follow-up email with the recording.
Yes, Rec user, schedule a call. Come talk to us. Tell us about your documents.
All right, shall we shut things down?
Make sure, looks like, yeah,
okay, that's...
You can wait for more thank yous, but yeah.
Ego is fully satisfied by the fact that 60 people wanted to hear about account books.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.